Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 28th of February 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. We're delighted to be joined today by Alex Thompson. Alex bringing us Eastern Approaches from the Netherlands. It's a wonder we're here, Mike, because the beast from the east is howling around the UK Column studio doors. There's at least a quarter of a centimetre of snow. That's the way the BBC would put it. And Britain is practically in shutdown, 1,000 schools shut. I remember back to the winter of 1963, the country got on and dug itself out. But apparently in 2018, Mike, we're going to collapse.
I regret to say, Brian, I can't remember back to the winter of 1963.
I'll let you off with that one then.
Okay.
Nevertheless, the beast from the east is here. And of course, remember that these winds have come straight out of Siberia and Russia. Putin is behind it, no doubt about it.
No doubt about it. I wonder, is Putin behind the recent earthquakes? Because we had an earthquake a week or so ago in South Wales. And last night, apparently, an earthquake in Cumbria. And this is what the Daily Mirror tweeted out this morning. After an earthquake hit the UK for the second time in less than 2 weeks this morning, make sure you know what to do. Hashtag stay safe. Now, for anybody that's not living in the UK, of course, this is a highly faulted geology in the UK, but we don't exactly have anything on the scale of the San Andreas fault. We're not going to get, level 6, 7 earthquakes. This was a 3 last night. Let's have a look at the little video that the Daily Mirror pushed out. Here it is. Here's what you should do if an earthquake strikes. And we've got an image there of a broken road. If you're inside a building, stay where you are until the shaking stops. Do not run outside and do not stand in doorways. We've got images of crumpled buses and what to do if we're inside buildings. This is the most spectacular piece of fake news, Brian, I've ever come across. I do not understand how they can justify spending the money and the production of this little video clip. That clearly didn't cost very much, but that's neither here nor there. These are not the types of images nor the type of scenario that we are likely to expect in the UK.
Indeed. So what we've got here, we could call it fake news. We could say it's fake news, or we've got something else going on. And this is a massive and concerted attack on the psyche of the British population. We're to be frightened of snow. We're to be frightened of earthquakes. We're to be frightened of the Russians. We're to be frightened of a financial collapse. We are to perpetually be frightened. And as we move into the news, we're going to start to show where some of this policy is coming from and some of the very dangerous corporate players that are now alongside government boasting they can change our behaviour.
But not to be outdone by the Daily Mirror, CNN Politics pushed this out this morning. North Korea sending chemical weapon supplies to Syria, according to a UN report. This is not according to a UN report. This is according to an unnamed, allegedly UN source, somebody who wanted to remain anonymous, and who said that North Korea has been sending supplies to Syria that could be used to produce chemical weapons. And this was, speaking on condition of anonymity, the diplomat said that North Korea had sent acid-resistant tiles, valves and thermometers to Syria. The diplomat was citing a report on North Korea authored by a UN panel of experts. This report hasn't been seen. Nobody knows whether it exists. The so-called UN diplomat isn't named, only spoke on condition of anonymity. We do not know whether this is a made-up story or not, but the fact of the matter is that there's nothing in the supplies that were allegedly sent to Syria which implies chemical weapons at all.
Right.
So
no
more to be said.
There we go. We're smiling. We're not laughing at these events. Well, we are actually, because it's now become so difficult to tell what is cartoon and what's reality in the mainstream press and media. And that, of course, is deliberate. Have a look at this one. This is the BBC. Now, remarkable. The BBC is proudly pushing out that its very own charity, BBC Media Action, has sacked 6 over sexual misconduct. So I was quite surprised to see this headline. Let's have a look at what they had to say. BBC Media Action said it had responded giving assurances. We've reviewed all cases in the last 10 years involving or potentially involving sexual misconduct. 6 such cases have been identified over this period, all of which were investigated. In 2 of these, no grounds were found to take any disciplinary action. In the remaining 4, formal disciplinary action was taken. None involved beneficiaries, and we're not aware of any child protection issues. A total of 6 people were dismissed with sexual harassment or watching pornography on work computers. Now, I don't know about you, Mike, but I had trouble doing the maths in that little equation there, because apparently there were 6 cases, 2, there was no grounds for any disciplinary action. So 2 from 6 roughly equals 4.
Yes.
In the remaining 4, formal disciplinary action was taken, but a total of 6 people were dismissed for sexual harassment and for watching pornography.
Well, they must have been watching porn in groups, is the only answer I can think of.
It's very strange, isn't it? Now, we did call BBC Media Action to clarify this morning. As usual, they didn't bother to call back. They're very, very secretive, this organisation. And remember, they train journalists overseas. So the BBC has got embedded BBC change agents in countries such as Syria and, of course, Iran. Let's bring in this, because a lot of the money they get is from the Department for International Development, and a DFID spokesman said DFID does not have a record of any sexual misconduct allegations relating to BBC Media Action on our counter-fraud and whistleblowing system. Well, there we are. So it's been kept secret from one of the government funders. But this is the big lie, that the BBC says that this charity is independent. Well, just let's look at a couple of things here. This is material which clearly shows from their own accounts that BBC provides office space. We've got this, that the BBC shares their pension pot with them, so that's pretty clear. They're not independent. And if we have a look at people, they're independent apart from the actual BBC people who are sitting as part of their trustee board. So the BBC news lie is that their charity is independent, but of course it absolutely isn't.
Right, let's come on to Brexit then. Well, the European Commission has proposed a common regulatory area in Ireland, because of course the big argument continues to be this issue of the Northern Irish border. They've unveiled this draft document today, this draft legal agreement, and Michel Barnier is the guy who's unveiled it. It's worth reading, because there's no huge surprises in it. Basically, what they're saying in the right-hand section of that graphic there is that they recognise that the special circumstances of Northern Ireland as a result of the Good Friday Agreement, and therefore they are proposing this common regulatory area as a fallback position in the event that no deal can be done over whether Britain stays within the customs union or not. Now, of course, it's the Northern Irish border that is the problem, and as you would expect, the Unionists in Northern Ireland and Brexiteers on the mainland are complaining bitterly, because the implications of what Barnier has proposed here is that the hard border between the UK, or between Britain and the EU, would move into the Irish Sea. That would mean that the constitutional arrangements around Northern Ireland would have to change, and that's not acceptable to the DUP. And of course, it's the DUP which is keeping Theresa May in government at the moment. So Theresa May in a bit of a difficult pickle here, it seems. Boris Johnson saying that the EU is attempting to hold Britain to ransom. This is all just positioning in order for the negotiation. At the end of the day, we know what Theresa May's position is on this. She actually would prefer herself to remain within the customs union, and is trying to sort of deal with people within her own cabinet that are at least notionally against that. Maybe now is a good time to bring Alex Thompson into the programme. Welcome to the programme, Alex.
Thank you, Mike. Just on that point there, I would say Michel Barnier is displaying the legendary sang-froid and dissimulation that's typical of Savoyards, the people from the eastern mountain region of France that he's from. He knows that this is a new and novel term, use of the term area, because in diplomacy, and treaty arrangements, area always means an area composed of entire states, entire countries, common travel area between the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom, or area of justice, which is one of the arrangements encompassing most EU companies, European Economic Area. This is an area in a non-traditional, novel sense, which is all of one state and part of another. And this is quite apart from the Republican Unionist debate. You and I could debate that till the cows come home, Mike, but it doesn't really make much difference. The thing is that one can almost hear the cackling in the background here. It's a kind of transparency coming up to the surface now of the Englander can have their pesky little island if they want, but we are not taking our hooks out of Ireland.
Yes, and I mean, where do you see this ending up? Because you've pointed out in this program before that prior to the European Union, the existence of the European Union, there was an agreement, a kind of trade agreement, a customs union type of thing between the North and the South, which allowed for free movement of people and goods and so on. This seems to be a position that neither side is really mentioning very much, and there's no willingness on either side to go back to that.
I think it is difficult to predict, Mike, because there's been a long 5-decade history of relations between what started out as the Free State and later the Republic of Ireland and the United Kingdom before both of them joined the EEC in '73. But in that half century, mostly dominated by Eamon de Valera on the Irish side, there was a kind of acceptance that the Irish people, as they're currently stood in economics, needed to emigrate to Britain as well as to other English-speaking countries around the world for work. And so there was that kind of working for the Irish people's benefit. So in the 1930s, you had coal being blockaded from the British side and dairy cattle from the Irish side, and everyone losing out. And so there was sensible attitudes through the war in the 50s and the 60s. What's changed now is that the Irish of Dublin bureaucracy and elite has become a client, a vassal of the EU, and is not taking decisions in the interest of the Irish people. So that makes it very hard to predict now.
Well, indeed, and we'll come on to that in a second. But just before we do, I wanted to just run through a couple of the questions that Barnier answered, a couple of the answers that he gave in his Q&A session after he had produced this document this morning. He was asked, are you trying to force Theresa May to stay in the customs union? Or are you trying to force a border between Britain and Ireland, which would topple her government? And he said he understood the constitutional arrangements of the UK. He respected those. He said he was trying to find solutions, and he said he was trying to take a calm and pragmatic approach. He was asked, do you accept it is inevitable that if the regulatory alignment backstop measure is approved, a border would be established in the Irish Sea? And he said he does not accept that. He said there's no certainty that any such backstop would be used. And he said he hopes that they will, between them, find a solution for some other option, i.e. a new trade deal. And then he was asked, in December, the whole divorce agreement was almost fell through. You must be aware of how explosive this is. Do you want to shock the UK into action? And he said he's familiar with the political situation in the UK, but there are complicated situations with other EU states. And he said that that it was the UK that decided unilaterally to leave the EU. And it had initiated the exit in March with the Article 50 letter. It was Theresa May who set the date for Brexit, and we reminded everybody that we're only 13 months away. And he said that he respects the UK and UK citizens, and he said that there needed to be a treaty, one which is legally binding and valid. And the thing that fascinates me about this, Alex, just to remind everybody once again, of course, we had a legally binding agreement. He had a legally binding agreement with David Cameron. And for all the shenanigans that's going on here, it's increasingly looking like we are heading to arrive at more or less the same point that was agreed in 2015-16.
Absolutely, that's what it is, Mike. So here you have, as it were, the position of us leaving the European Union. Here you have full federalisation with my other hand. And the proposal was in 2015, before the referendum, that we would go this way to reach this point. And now it's been decided that instead we're going to go this way to reach the same point. Basically, the point was thrashed out in advance before we were allowed to have our referendum, and before Cameron was told by his City of London and or European continental string pullers to allow a referendum, which was not Tory policy and which did a lot of damage to his party, but he had to hold it because someone wanted it who outranked him.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the standards in public life in Ireland, so let's just talk about that now. So we've got you've got a couple of articles here from the Irish Independent. The first one is it a sick joke? Master of High Court criticises Taoiseach's advice to those facing repossession. And on the right, you've got corrupt Garda sent forged invoice to UCC for extra policing fees.
So these are just two examples of the general collapse of morals in Ireland, which used to have extremely high standards of probity and, of course, still has the common law, too much to the chagrin of the rest of the European Union. Ireland itself is a bloc on full civil law integration. To some extent, Malta is too. On the High Court matter, there is an advisory service called Awala, Irish for at home, which the Taoiseach, the new gentleman, Leo Varadkar, a very young son of a doctor who has not got no roots in the country and no loyalty to the Irish people, as far as the Irish people can see, he crassly said if people are facing repossession in this wave of repossessions that's been sweeping Ireland for years now, the best thing they can do, Varadkar, the Prime Minister, Taoiseach said, is go to this Awala advisory service. And of course, the Master of the High Court, Mr. Honohan, has said, what planet is the Taoiseach on? Awala is just a kind of citizens' advice bureau that gives someone a €200 voucher to give them initial legal advice while they're facing repossession. This is idiotic advice. And the Master of the High Court himself, Mr. Honohan, has had to try to draft a bill which will provide proper legal remedies for those facing repossession and allow them to continue on a rent basis in their property. As for the corrupt Garda, that was to do with University College Cork and is just a sign of just how far the police rot is spreading throughout the British Isles. Cork is as bad as some of the British cities now in this regard, and the police do seem to have networks protecting each other in the way that we've seen in major British cities.
And why is Varadkar having a temper tantrum?
Because he has spent €5 million on an advisory and an advertising, basically a spin agenda, to sell to the Irish people a vision for 2040 in which he's gone on camera and said, we need a fifth extra people. We need 20% extra. He didn't put it in percentage terms. He said 1 million people, but at the most generous estimate of the all-island population, or even just the 26 counties of the Republic. He says the million people he says that the country needs in the next 20 or so years is going to be something like a fifth increase. And if people freeze the screen, they can see the feedback there, which has been highly unflattering. So there's the Speaker of the Dáil had to reprimand the Taoiseach and tell him to contain himself, to restrain himself was the word used, as you can see on the tweet on the right. And people at the bottom on the right of the tweet there are saying, how old is this? What age is this Taoiseach? Why doesn't he grow up? Extremely childish performance in which the only thing he could do when criticised on the floor of the Dáil, the Irish Parliament, about this was to say, look, the opposition pay for stuff as well and don't always make the funding of the adverts clear. This is the national future and the future of the very Irish people, regardless of the state, at stake. And as you can see, the Irish government has no more concern for the Irish people in this matter than the European Union does. They're just pawns.
Okay, thanks for that, Alex. Now, yesterday we were talking about this issue of civil society and the role of civil society in our governance. And yesterday, Penny Mordaunt, the Secretary of State for International Development, was speaking at Bond. Now, Bond is the leading, they describe themselves as the leading network of over 400 international development organisations. So she was, the DFID is working with Bond, and she was speaking at their conference yesterday. They are talking about providing financing to Bond and all the various international charities that constitute Bond. As part of UK Aid Connect, DFID is providing grants until 2021 to a diverse range of organisations to address the key development challenges in selected priority areas such as disability, child labour, modern slavery, and working towards global security and stability. They announced £4 million to Bond, plus a whole load more money to the other NGOs. Now, what are they talking about? Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. She said, we know that in current trajectories, achieving the global goals, which we talk about and show our commitment to in the pin badges we wear, is simply out of reach. The facts speak for themselves, and the many we're letting down. If we want these facts to change, we have to change what we do. The challenge of the global goals is to leave nobody behind, and civil society organisations have an essential role in enabling us to find and support the marginalised. It's only through charities that we'll be able to hear the voice of the people we are there to serve. And I want to strengthen the role that civil society organisations can play. We need the humility to recognise what others can bring will multiply our efforts, and we need to let others help. It will require us to change where we work and who we work with. It will require more sharing of data and greater cooperation. And it's that last statement that really defines the situation, Brian, isn't it? Because we're talking about nothing about actual charity. We're talking about creating data sharing, greater cooperation, breaking down silos, leadership, global leadership.
This is the hidden world government installing itself by changing society in their image. We're not to be given a vote on it. We're not to be told what it is in black and white terms. This is all just cruising through with 95% of the population totally unaware of what's being created here.
Well, in an effort to make people aware of what's being created here, Martin Edwards has produced an article for the UK Column website, The Regionalisation Process, Rebuilding the Institutions and Systems of World Government, building the institutions and systems of world government. He says, in the process of regionalisation, which is leading us all towards global government, we've been witnessing the incremental transfer of nation-state sovereign powers to supranational bodies. There's a whole article of information and evidence presented. I strongly recommend people to go and read that. But he ends by saying, it has now become evident that the processes of globalisation and regionalisation have provided fertile ground for the former presidents and prime ministers, that former presidents and prime ministers have been able to capitalise on through their involvement with NGOs and civil society organisations. Just as there was no public mandate for British sovereignty to be pooled with other nations of the European Union, there was no popular mandate for our membership of the broader African, Caribbean and Pacific group of states, nor the Union for the Mediterranean. These pan-regional structures are additional building blocks propelling us all towards a system of global government, the final form of which is yet to be revealed to the general public. So I strongly recommend people read that article. But Alex, what's your take on this, on what we were talking about yesterday with regard to civil society organisations and the comments that Penny Mordaunt has made at Bond?
I think that the first undoing of this, ironically enough, is actually going to be the European Union's own data regulations, because GDPR, the General Directive on, I forget the rest of the acronym, but it's to do with personal data, is coming into force in May. And all over the continent, there's great hoo-ha. There ought to be in Britain, because we're still EU members, about how many public bodies and companies are going to be fined for huge breaches unless they radically amend their data holding models. And Penny Mordaunt there, has obviously been pushed by the third sector, not speaking for herself, is talking about providing more of our data to more companies and countries more freely without our informed consent. This is actually, if there's anything that's going to put a brake on it, well, it should be British common law. But the only thing that's likely to in the current climate is that there is some degree of popular involvement in EU legislation now and through the European Parliament. And that's one of the few areas where the public is so agitated that MEPs do actually legislate more toughly than the Commission, is in this area of data protection, because the European continentals have got more sense than we have in protecting their personal data. So I think ultimately Britain is pretending to have one of the toughest regulations in this regard, but its practice as a government is to share plans about us and data on us with all corners of the globe, not least through Commonwealth structures, and that is perhaps going to be challenged by the EU.
Well, something's got to happen, Alex. Let's have a look at what was going on in Parliament yesterday. So this is the announcement, basically, that Cambridge Analytica was going to be questioned on fake news. Cambridge Analytica had put in a letter to the committee on the 23rd of February. And this is what was going to take place. So Mr. Alexander Nix, the chief executive of Cambridge Analytica, was going to be putting his wisdom across to the committee. MPs apparently to use the opportunity to ask Mr. Nix about, amongst other issues, the way in which data can be used to target messaging, their experience in data-driven communications and marketing, and how such targeting contributes to the echo chamber effect on social media. This is all about controlling social media. Cambridge Analytica combines data mining and data analysis in order to focus tailored communications to voters during elections. That's weasel wording, because what they're actually talking about is manipulating the ideas and views of voters. But this is the bit I picked up on, I wasn't aware of. This company is a subsidiary of the SCL Group, of which Mr. Nix is on the board of directors. So let's call up the SCL Group. Here they are. And what do they have to say about themselves? Well, we better expand it on screen so that we can all see. It says the SCL Group provides data analytics and strategy to governments and military organisations worldwide. For over 25 years, we have conducted, quote, behavioural change programmes in over 60 countries and have been formally recognised for our work in defence and social change.
Is this the militarisation of behavioural change, in a sense?
No, Mike, because they've already done it. It's already under the control of these people, and these very, very dangerous corporatists are being brought into the heart of Parliament. Now, just bring in this one. This is also on their webpage. It's very big on a partnership. SCL is proud to support Walking with the Wounded, a charity dedicated to helping wounded and sick veterans and former military personnel into civilian careers. Now, I'm happy to say live on air that one of the things that terrifies the government is that their dirty deeds, particularly treason, would be discovered by ex-military people. The government terrified of military veterans, and we've been watching Cambridge Analytica bury itself into the social media realm of the veterans. Now we're seeing this immensely powerful American company brought into Westminster. What they are doing is advising the government on how to manipulate public opinion. And that public opinion isn't going to be helping to expose the corruption, criminality and child abuse in Westminster. Of course, this is to get the wider public calmed down so they're not asking the right questions. And bringing this one for the SCL Group as well. This is just excellent. I'm sorry, the text is a bit small. It says, our vision is to be the premier provider of data analytics and strategy for behaviour change. And our mission is to create behaviour change through research, data analytics and strategy for both domestic and international government clients. And the UK government is a client. So let's bring it back to Alexander Nix, who is the man who is now briefing effectively the British Parliament on his policy. Educated at Eton, Manchester University, began his career as a financial analyst with Barings Securities, Robert Fraser Partners LLP. And what's he boasting about? Over the past 9 years, Alexander has worked for more than 40 political campaigns, US, Caribbean, South America, Europe, Africa and Asia. These people are playing with the minds of the public. This is brainwashing, Alex, and it's brainwashing in plain sight, in my view at least.
I'll tell you in 30 seconds how the brainwashing works, Brian, because it's not something that they can be hauled up on easily. Sorry for those listening in audio only, but I earlier in the broadcast did an illustration using my hands vertically. I'm now going to do so horizontally. Here is the level of a party that needs to get elected. We'll put that in the middle. The traditional way of getting elected against your rivals was to push your own vote up and keep the margin the same. That can't be done now because above a certain point there's so many jaded people such as UK column viewers and sympathisers. So what Cambridge Analytica does is tell parties how to get the opposition voters to stay away, so that with 25% of the vote or so you can still get a so-called landslide election because most people stayed at home.
Even though the actual vote bringing the party in is then a fraction of the total vote, i.e. we've got governments being formed on whatever it was, 23% of the vote. So these governments should never exist because they haven't got a mandate from the people. And you're saying that Cambridge Analytica are being used to help skew that situation even further.
They are, yes, and the worrying thing, David Ellis can go into more detail, is that, as you've pointed out, this comes out of military and US military ideas. It's about whole real-time, rich data files again, that issue of data protection that the EU is finally waking up to at a citizen level. The US doesn't have those restrictions. except it should be observing common law and natural law. But these military bodies in the US have spent decades working out how to track people's opinions in real time, which goes back to the Nazis, the Forschungsamt, the German Signals Intelligence Agency, which was very successful, and we have no records of it apart from what was exfiltrated to America. That's where the idea began, of taking the pulse of the population and splitting it up into interest groups and tracking them to see what will fly and what will not, and how to dissuade people from carrying on with their opinions. That is the basis on which Cambridge Analytica touts itself, that it has real-time intelligence on all of us.
Well, let's see whether this sheds a little bit of further light on it, because this is Global Future, a think tank. It's all about openness equals opportunity, apparently. Global Future is a fresh voice in the debate about our country's direction. We make the case for immigration, freedom of movement, and building an open and vibrant Britain that looks out to the world and succeeds in it. Let's just have a brief look at who's on their advisory board. So we've got the CEO of Sainsbury's PLC and so on. These people, we've got a dancer and other artists and so on. But anyway, they've produced this report today, which is in quite a number of the mainstream press, saying that British politics isn't really about left and right anymore. It's about open and closed. And are people open to multiculturalism and globalization and immigration, or are they closed to it? And they're saying that traditionally voters have never been more prepared to vote across cross-party lines. The analysis was carried out by David Cameron's former Director of Strategy, Andrew Cooper, using a polling company called Populous, and they did that on behalf of this organisation, Global Future. And so they are showing apparently what they describe as a stark divide between people in the 18 to 44 age group and those over 45. And they're saying that people that are over 45 are much more closed-minded to a multicultural society. They don't like immigration. That people below the age of 45 are much more willing to accept it, much more open-minded, and this is a much better situation. Open versus closed, they say, is becoming more and more significant. They said it means lots of people who once were good bets to be Conservative now turn out to be Labour, and people that pollsters might have predicted would be Labour are now Tories. Now, if anybody's thinking, well, this sounds like a bit of deja vu, well, of course it is, because last week we were talking about this guy, Femi Olawale, and Our Future, Our Choice is the organisation that he's presenting, where he's saying that the under 55 population of the UK voted to remain. So in 5 years' time, by absolutely anyone's maths, we'll have a population that voted to remain in the EU. So, basically closed-minded older people are the Brexiters. And of course, he was then reinforced by a Labour peer, whose name escapes me at the moment, and one of the big Remain groups. So I don't find it a coincidence that a week after this came out, that this new report from this organisation has come out. They're continuing to push the propaganda.
Well, and we know this man's fully connected with the European Union, so he's been groomed in effectively change agency, him being a change agent in the EU, and now he's enforcing that in Britain. This is the pernicious nature of the EU, that it infiltrated so many organisations, and Erasmus, where there's an students are encouraged to move between countries to go to university, of course, is part of this, as was the twinning arrangement.
But Alex, this type of report is another example of the use of polling and analytics to try to build a narrative which is helping change people's views and change people's behaviour ultimately.
Yes, and if people want to see how it began, because like all of these things, it was described best in Yes Minister, the British 1970s sitcom. You can find the bit on Yes Minister, perhaps even on YouTube, where the minister says we need a poll, and the civil servants wryly respond, well, what do you want the poll to say? And the minister says, well, the poll will just say what the public think, won't it? And of course, they give an example. I think it was gun control, starting off with, do you agree that guns are evil and shoot people and kill people, and wouldn't you like to see them controlled? And then the same poll is done with leading questions for the other side. But of course, only the final question in each poll is the one that's actually commissioned by the client, and which ends up So it's being reported on. So it's easy to butter people up and make them say what you want.
Now, Alex, a minute or two ago you mentioned English common law, and I was fascinated by this article in the BBC. The headline is "Why English Courts Are Opening in the EU." It says it's English law in English, but the courtroom is in Paris. According to French reports, the new international chamber is an attempt to capitalise on Brexit and steal London's crown as a global hub for lucrative commercial legal disputes. Other English language courts are popping up in the Netherlands, Germany and Belgium, with those behind them also talking about seizing opportunities from the UK's departure from the EU. English courts have long been chosen by companies based all over the world to govern their contracts. So are these new rivals a threat to London's crown? What do you think?
It depends on who is staffing them. On the one hand, if this is washed up internationalist British lawyers wanting to get accredited for another jurisdiction, then there could be something in it. But if it's continentals who've trained in English and call themselves near native speakers, the usual joke they call themselves now, that's going to be even worse, because they're going to be speaking 80% English that they think is 100%, and they're going to be understanding the legal tradition and the traditions that form the common law very, very poorly. But either way, I would like to go down to one of these courts in Benelux or Paris or wherever and try to do a 1215 Magna Carta trial, with peace officers and the rest. I don't think it would go down well, to put it frankly. But anyway, in either the common law or the civil law jurisdictions, the people to watch are the clerks of the court, not the judges or the language being spoken. The clerks know all the secrets.
Yes, indeed. Now, it's the Human Rights Council is taking place in Geneva today and yesterday. Well, I wanted to compare and contrast just briefly the approach to the issue of human rights and the Human Rights Council between the UK and Russia. So here is first of all Lord Ahmed speaking briefly at the Human Rights Council in Geneva yesterday.
It is our opportunity to reaffirm the Declaration's enduring relevance, an opportunity to redouble our collective efforts to uphold the rights of individuals, to nurture the creativity and human progress which flow from these very rights, and to promote the openness and tolerance that allows societies to flourish. We must do this now, more than ever, because all around the world, these rights are under threat. At this Council, let us renew our determination. Let us come together. Let us stand up for the downtrodden. Let us speak up for those with no voice, and to strive to create the world we all aspire to, the world we wish to see, a world in which everyone, everywhere, can live without fear, without suffering, and is free to live the life they choose.
Are you inspired, Brian?
Well, clearly he's preaching. The man is preaching. He's preaching from the platform that Britain is an upstanding, truthful, moral, well-behaved country, not ruled by criminals and child abusers, at least in some instances. I don't think I've ever seen such a pious, pompous presentation as that. 3 Ps. Yes.
Unbelievable, right? So that was the British approach. Sergei Lavrov, on the other hand, took the opportunity to criticise the West and Britain for our activities, particularly in Syria, and particularly the hypocrisy. The international community shouldn't divide terrorists as good and bad ones, he said. The manifest unwillingness of some council members to unequivocally condemn international terrorism in all its forms and manifestations under the pretext of upholding freedom of expression is striking. We believe that dividing terrorists into good and bad ones is unacceptable, especially when it's done depending on the extremist proclaimed objectives or sources of financing. Russia continues to fight this vicious practice of double standards and supports the Syrian army in its move to destroy terrorism. Alex, well, I don't even know how to frame the question. How do you compare these two?
Sergei Lavrov lives on Earth, and Lord Ahmed lives in global land, I think is the most succinct way to say it.
Yes. Yes, okay, let's move on.
Well, we reinforce the point. by just coming back to John Wedger, the ex-Metropolitan detective who blew the whistle on massive cover-up of child abuse in Westminster, or London rather. This was involving the Met Police, it was involving MPs, local authorities, charities. So he was interviewed on Three Counties Radio yesterday, talking in a very measured way about what had happened to him. He was supported by another ex-policewoman, Maggie Oliver. So here we've got corroboration of the story that the British state has covered up child abuse. So just think about the style of Lord Ahmed's delivery to the great and the good in the world. This is what's happening in Britain under his nose. We showed that in the interview, former Policing Minister Mike Penning had said that he handed the whole file to do with John Wedger's testimony of the cover-up of child abuse. He handed the file to the Home Office and it, quote, vanished. And I would just like to say that the UK column at least has taken action on this. And I'm going to say it's so important. It isn't just the UK column. It's got to be other people. But this was an email that we sent through to the Home Office where we referred to the interview. We said, please can the Home Office provide a statement as to why this child abuse and cover-up report vanished? Can you also say what action was being taken to investigate the loss and the information provided by the Met child abuse whistleblower, former detective? We notice today that they'd also tweeted out something very interesting. Here it is. They retweeted a tweet from the Department of Education. If you think a child might be at risk, report it. Even if you're not completely sure, find out more. If you think it, report it. Now that's pretty interesting from an organisation that is losing reports submitted to them. We've actually also been emailing into Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and the Fire Service. We said, can HMIC FRS please confirm that during their latest inspection they were fully aware of the appalling treatment of Detective Constable Wedger and that they took on board his evidence as to the abuse of power. If they were not aware of his testimony, why were they not made aware of the case by the Met Police? And finally, now being fully appraised of Mr. Wedger's testimony, what action will Mr. Matt Parr take to address the evidence in respect to the findings of their latest current report, which said there were weaknesses? Just continue through this. We've got the independent, there's the word, Office for Police Conduct. And the key point here is that during the IOPC investigation of John Wedger's testimony, the widespread cover-up of the abuse of children by Met Police, local authorities, etc., some 5 IOPC officers stood down from the investigation, including the individual last responsible for handling John Wedger's case. So what we're saying here is that we know that basically a number of people stood down from the investigation into what John Wedger was saying, and then they produce a report which says no evidence to support what this man is saying. So we've taken the trouble to email them as well. So this is media questions from Michael Lockwood, the Director General. We said that on a BBC Three Counties radio, it had been reported basically that, IOPC stated that there was no evidence to back up the testimony of ex-Met Police Detective John Wedger. Can they confirm they made the statement? Secondly, can they confirm that a significant number of the staff involved with handling the Wedger case left their posts before the investigation was completed? And thirdly, in the same BBC Three Counties interview, former Policing Minister Mike Penning said he'd handed a file on John Wedger to senior civil servants in the Home Office and it, quote, vanished, unquote. That being the case, can Mr. Lockwood confirm he was made aware of the content of Mr. Penning's file by the Home Office at the time of IOPC's investigation into the child abuse cover-up allegations? So we've asked the questions right into the heart of the organisation. That is the UK column. We say now live on air how many of our viewers and listeners have also taken this action because it's not enough for the UK column to be doing it. We're showing and providing the evidence. It's up to our viewers and listeners. So let's bring it in. Here's the Home Office Twitter page in purple, the colour of kings. And there was that tweet. So send your child abuse to them so they can get rid of it. This is the little video, which I think should play through. There's no sound to go with it. But this is what they were saying. 4 types of abuse: physical, emotional, sexual, and the other one to come up should do, neglect. Here we are. Notice this is all directed at children, but in fact it's for adults, Mike. Mm-hmm. So there's the cartoon. Tackle child abuse by sending your evidence to us so that we can vanish it. Report it so we can vanish it. And I'll just end on this one, that is the Home Office website, and you can see that we've gone into that and posted our reports about John Wedger so that it's there on the Home Office on the Home Office Twitter page. We need people to take action on this sort of material.
We are right out of time, Brian.
Okay.
But I just wanted to end on this one because Alex, this is a fantastic little video. We've obviously seen it independently of each other, but this little video, a sing-along about the white helmets, it is just perfect.
It is, Mike, and I'll in less than a minute I'll be able to read it to people. Banjo Mala writes, "I have a white helmet on my head. I'll wait for the cameras to roll. Then I sprint with my stretcher through the dead and pull a miracle. My daddy's a top British spy, and our best friends are the press. They show us how to shine and glorify. They got us an Oscar, no less. But we're fiercely independent, a fact that no one can deny, except that the Americans pay our rent, and the rest, well, the British they buy. We live next door to ISIS, or sometimes the al-Nusra brood. They're not always the nicest, but they always have the very best food. Apply my makeup, my dust and blood. Set the scene, ready action, take one. It's my time to be stretchered through the neighbourhood, dodging bullets and missiles and a bomb. But it's not all work. We like to play, so we steal a bride and have a wedding. Oh, we'll party in the Sharia way and stand by for an ISIS beheading. Oh, the future is bright. We plan to grow in size. Only love and peace could cause us failure. But there's so many countries to destabilise. We're off to the Philippines and Venezuela. So thanks, all you viewers in TV land, for your belief and your simple trust. May you never come to understand it was only makeup, fakery and dust."
Well, excellent, and humour's always required in amongst this very dark stuff. So thank you very much for that, Alex. I know you had some other serious things to cover. We'll bring you back on to do that in the forthcoming days. We'll end on the note that we're delighted to have a visitor from France with us, a gentleman who's come all the way through the snow to see the UK column in action, and also to talk about what's happening in France, which appears to mirror much of what is happening around our Conservative government with Theresa May and formerly David Cameron. So there we are. Thanks for joining us, and we'll leave you with that thought. It's not enough to watch and listen. It's action that conquers fear and, of course, stops the rot. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.